was amazing on Saturday down in Eugene.
Cool.
First place.
Yeah, I heard first place. Woohoo!
My neighbor's daughters, or at least one of them, are on the dancing team.
Okay, we're now live on Facebook.
Excellent. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here for the City of Philomath City Council meeting on February 14th of 2022. And once again, this is our special Valentine's Day edition. Tonight, we are going to be having a meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency and also the City Council. And on our agenda is a proclamation for the Black History Month, a public hearing for an amendment to the comprehensive plan for the chapter of citizens involvement, and also some unfinished business, including budget committee appointments and a review of the 11th Street Engineers Report, an award for the Downtown Streetscape Sidewalk Inlay Design Services Contract, proposed meeting information enhancements, a grant application for city park benches, appointing an inclusivity committee member. We're considering a sponsorship request from the Philomath High School Hall of Fame, and implementing our low-income water assistance program agreement. So with that, we'll first get started with a roll call.
Mayor, are we starting with the Urban Renewal Agency meeting?
Yes, we are. We're going to start with a roll call for the Urban Renewal Agency meeting.
Excellent. Jessica Andrade.
Present.
Catherine Bisco.
Here.
Ruth Causey.
Here.
Matt Lehman.
Here.
David Lowe.
Here.
Teresa Nielsen.
Here.
And Chaz Jones.
Present.
Thank you.
With that, we have some minutes that need to be approved from our last meeting in June 28th. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes? Councilor Causey, I think you weren't heard.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion made by Councilor Causey, seconded by Councilor Lehman. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It looked like that motion carried unanimously. So thank you. And with that, we have the only item of business is the appointment of the 2022-2023 budget officer. Chris, do you want to speak to that?
Karen, so I'm happy to report that our new finance director, Mike Brzezinski, started today. First day on the job, got to meet staff and get all his paperwork filled out, or most of his paperwork filled out. We throw quite a bit at him on the first couple of days. But recommend that he be appointed as this year's budget officer. He begin the budget process and begin preparing the budget to present to the budget committee.
Wonderful, thank you. And there's a recommended motion for us to consider. And Councilor Causey?
I recommend that we appoint Finance Director Mike Brzezinski as budget officer. And I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Okay, thank you. Motion made by Councilor Causey.
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Lehman. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Excellent. With that, our business with the Urban Renewal Agency concludes, and we will adjourn that meeting. And we will then call our city council meeting to order, and we'll get started with a roll call.
Ruth Causey.
Here.
I started in the middle, sorry. Now I'm lost. It's going to be a long night, isn't it? Matt Lehman.
Here.
David Lowe.
Here.
Teresa Nielsen.
Here.
Jessica Andrade.
Present.
Catherine Bisco.
Here.
Chaz Jones.
Here. Great, thank you for that. And first item of business, we have a proclamation for celebrating Black History Month. I wrote the draft, offered it for comment to the NAACP, and then we took that to the Inclusivity Committee, and we have the draft list before you. I'd like to make a motion that we, the city council pass this proclamation before I go ahead and read that. Can I get a motion? Councilor Andrade?
I'd like to say something first.
Oh.
So can we get a motion?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion made by Councilor Lowe,
Second.
seconded by Councilor Kazi. And Councilor Andrade has a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note that this is just the first step, and that we are working. This is just the first step in a long journey that never ends of trying to fight for racial justice, and that, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Oh yes, just that we know we can improve, and we look forward to adding Black joy, and as well as more stories of Black resistance, joy, and contributions to the community of Philomath.
Thank you. So all in favor of passing this proclamation, please raise your hand and say aye. Oh, Councilor Kazi.
Question.
Councilor Kazi.
Yes, and I recognize this is a broad question, so if you don't feel it can be answered now, feel free to defer your response. But the agenda item summary indicates that, let's see, that the minorities have been living under oppressive legislation historically and presently in our Philomath community. And my question is, are there examples of legislation, of local legislation, which we have the power to modify to make them less oppressive? And if you'd like to,
this is, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I meant more of the historical, and like how it has historical legislation has effects currently, but also just that federal legislation and state legislation and whatever we may have laws that are discriminatory against people of color, people with abilities, LGBTQIA people. So it's just, no matter what, everything's connected. Everything's affected by everything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bisco.
Before we make the final motion, or excuse me, before we take the final vote on this, I just want to take this opportunity to first acknowledge honoring Black History Month in the city of Philomath, and certainly the contributions around Mount Union and Reuben Shipley. But I wonder if in moving forward, and here seems a place to have that conversation, we're asking a lot of our inclusivity committee to contribute to these proclamations and to share their perspectives and their value as community members. I know in the past, it's been quite a few years, I want to say a couple decades, that we actually included supporting members of proclamations and memorandums of things like these. And in a case like this, would it be appropriate to acknowledge the membership of the inclusivity committee by name on a proclamation such as this?
Yeah, I don't have an answer.
And that might be, then I'll clarify, something that this council could consider, or perhaps make an amendment to this motion to approve this proclamation. because they are a very significant contributing part of these proclamations. And I'd like to see that they're acknowledged in this space as well.
Do you have a specific modification that you're asking for? Or make a motion to it?
That would be a motion to amend then, I believe, which would be, I would like to add the inclusivity committee membership as signatories on this proclamation for their participation in supporting this proclamation.
I'll second that. So motion made by Councilor Biscoe, seconded by myself to amend the signatories to add the inclusivity committee. So all in favor of amending the document with that, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. So with that, we have this proclamation. Can I get a vote from City Council on moving forward with this proclamation? Please raise your hand and say aye if you're in support. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and read this proclamation real quick. Whereas we honor Black History Month by acknowledging past injustices while seeking a more inclusive, equitable, and just path forward. Whereas the first of Oregon's exclusionary laws adopted in 1844 mandated that Black Oregonians would be publicly whipped every 6 months until they departed. Whereas the Oregon Constitution of 1857 prohibited Black Oregonians from owning real estate, making contracts, voting, or using the legal system. Whereas the Federal Donation Land Act of 1850 granted free land in Oregon exclusively to white settlers, creating a white landowning class that continues to hold great privilege and power in Oregon to this day. Whereas these and other racist laws and policies sent messages that Black Oregonians were not welcome. Whereas the foundation of racist policies continues to have implications for Black people who visit or reside in the state of Oregon. Whereas the Black people may have made, or that many Black people have made Oregon and the city of Philomath their home and have made significant contributions to this state and our community, including the donation of lands for Mount Union Cemetery by Mr. Reuben Shipley in 1861. Whereas the Black people are valued and vital members of the Philomath community. Whereas the Philomath City Council is committed to creating a community where all who come here and feel safe and welcome, and to moving forward towards dismantling and transforming unjust and racist systems where they persist. Now, therefore, we, the City Council of the City of Philomath, and I'll just add the Inclusivity Committee, hereby proclaims that racial discrimination, hatred, and white supremacy have no place in the city of Philomath or our government. We call on Black people of our community to join us in honoring Black History Month, learning about the history of Black people in Oregon and in Philomath, and combating racism. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. And with that, I do have a request by Councilor Causey to make a motion prior to getting started on tonight's agenda. Councilor Causey.
Thank you. I actually have two motions, but the first motion, as stated in the council rules, item 2.1.0.016B4, those who attend public meetings are required to adhere to the council's rule of proceedings and observe the same standards of decorum as members of the council. I move that this language be included in the visitors and petitions information for all council and subcommittee meetings. Further, at the discretion of the presiding officer, members of the public who fail to observe these rules of procedure will be asked to discontinue speaking and will not be allowed to speak again for the remainder of the meeting.
So we have a motion made by Councilor Causey, and I'll second it so that Councilor Causey can then speak to it. So we have a motion made by Counselor Causey and seconded by myself.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe the council and city staff deserve to be treated by the public with the same degree of dignity and respect with which we are required to conduct ourselves. There's no one on this council or city staff who does not put in a great deal of time, effort, and thought into the work we do here. Just reviewing the meeting materials and attending the meetings to which council and staff are assigned requires countless hours of preparation. However, I believe all members of the council and staff go well beyond this in their efforts on behalf of the city. Disrespectful remarks and personal attacks directed at council members or city staff violate the council rules. They do not benefit the council or the community, and they cannot be tolerated. I hope that other council members will join me in putting a stop to this behavior.
Thank you for that, Counselor Causey. You have a comment, Counselor Bisco.
Yes, my comment is this is a little bit out of context. I don't necessarily automatically disagree with what's being said, but I would prefer an opportunity to review the language of the motion that we are proposing here. So if there's a way to table this motion for that opportunity to do so before we take a vote, or so that we can have more council prepared to have a discussion on any language or wording amendments that we might need, I would appreciate that opportunity. And again, just to clarify, I don't necessarily disagree with this idea, but it's a context that's coming out of, I'm not sure where, actually.
Counselor Causey.
I would just point out that the language is directly from the council rules, which we've reviewed numerous times. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with it.
And just to, can you just state the one phrase, and staff, maybe the staff can just put the phrase up on the screen and share it so that it can be read. I think, Chris, can we do that? Or
Give me just a moment. I'll copy and paste. Or
and the proposal is to add this sentence to the, or the motion is to add this sentence to the statement made with visitors and comments, basically requesting that this public treat staff with respect and those same standards of decorum as a council. So
let me
can you
go.
increase the size?
Is
That's good. Thank you.
that better? Is it getting better?
And can you highlight the part in quotes? Thank you.
Just for clarification, Your Honor, that language could be inserted after the second sentence, which now reads, members of the council will not discuss topics or make decisions during this time, but may take comments or requests under advisement, assign topics to a future council or standing committee agenda, or request staff to take action.
Thank you. And Councilor Pisco.
And so if we're going to move forward with this, I'd like to see the language that we are proposing be embedded in this up on the screen as well. And I would like to clarify, so that I guess part of my questioning is the comments about disrespectful, I'm assuming language, violating council rules, putting a stop to this business. I'm not sure what business we're trying to stop. I've been attending meetings for many years now, and what does that mean? And I think that those are implied accusations that even start this conversation off a little bit uncomfortably. So maybe I'm asking for a little more clarification of what putting a stop to this business means and violating council rules. And I, again, would like to see the language of the council rule that we are talking about up on the screen.
I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm missing this reference to business.
I'm sorry, the reference to what?
Word business.
I can't hear you. You got very quiet.
The word business. I don't know where that word came from in your comment.
Okay, excuse me. So putting a stop to this behavior, I may have misspoke that. I did speak it correctly the first time. So that was just how this was framed. It's unclear why that is, and it feels very argumentative in a context that's coming out of nowhere at the beginning of this meeting. Like this might have been a motion that was better prepared and put into our packet for consideration.
Thank you. Councilor Causey.
Yes, I have two thoughts. First, with respect to stopping this behavior, the appropriate action would be point of order. If a member of the public is behaving or speaking inappropriately. My second thought is, if you wish, we can table this motion. I have a second motion which will explain the motivation behind this.
Sure. So you're making a motion to table this conversation until when?
I'm not making that motion.
Got it. Okay, so all in favor of passing the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye. Motion. Okay, so I see 4 in favor. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. All abstaining, please raise your hand and say. Okay, so motion carries 4-1 with 2 abstentions. And then Councilor Causey, you had a second motion.
I do, thank you. Before introducing this motion, I would like to say that I would make the same motion had comments of a similar nature been directed at any of the councilors or staff members. Recognizing the egregious accusation directed at the city manager by a member of the public at the January 24th, 2022 City Council meeting, I make a motion of confidence in support of City Manager Chris Workman.
So we had a motion made by Councilor Causey and seconded by Councilor Lowe. Do you want to speak to that motion, Councilor Causey?
I do, thank you. Each of us comes to the city council or staff with an agenda, something that motivated us to run for office or apply for and accept a position with the city. Whether it be home rule, transparency, equity, inclusion, safety, or growth and prosperity. After working together for over a year, it's become pretty obvious when someone is trying to advance their agenda, particularly the city manager. As a council, I find this to be a group of very intelligent individuals that are not easily misled. One that is effective in fulfilling its role in holding the city manager accountable. Coercion is a serious accusation. This is the accusation that was leveled at the city manager. Apparently others weren't as sensitive to it as I was, but coercion is a practice of persuading someone to do something or not do something by force or intimidation. Over the 4 years I've known and worked with our city manager, I've never observed behavior that would even approach coercion. I hope the rest of the council will join me in condemning this accusation and supporting the city manager.
Thank you. And I'm just going to, I'm in support of doing this, but I do want to just comment that it would be much better for these kinds of things to be put onto the agenda. I do recognize that and requested, a week prior, so that it would be. But so in the future, I do hope that we can do that. But I appreciate the motion. Councilor Bisco.
So again, I feel like we're getting parts of this narrative, perhaps not all of it. Certainly we all experience these meetings differently, and I'm not 100% certain what Councilor Causey is. I know what she's saying. I don't know who she's pointing to. I will say this, that public testimony is protected by freedom of speech, the right to speak your mind, the right to choose the words that you choose to use, and it does in fact include the word coercion. I would be hesitant to establish any principle or any policy or any motion that would leave it to our best judgment to determine what is or is not appropriate. We're not in fact justices of the law. We do not have that space where we can decide as a council or a council body what is or is not appropriate behavior. While we may take offense both personally and or as a council body, as is being proposed here, it's not our place to say that you cannot speak before this council freely in this country as it stands today. I'm happy to entertain this motion as an individual councilor if it was to be put in writing in an agenda packet that we can review. This does seem very interesting that we're spending this much time in this space right off the bat and completely out of the blue. And again, in defense of the freedom of speech that we all are gifted in this country, I will not be supporting this motion.
Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, along similar lines, I feel like this this type of a thing is very serious, and I don't think it should be entered into lightly and without any kind of notice. And it seems like it was done that way on purpose from where I'm sitting. So I also am not going to be in favor of this. And just as I abstained from the last vote because it really wasn't clear what the end objective was, and I think that was also purposeful, I will be definitely voting no on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Causey.
I just wanted to point out that both our council rules and Robert's Rules of Order rule against personal attacks, and in my mind, this is truly was a personal attack.
Thank you. Councilor Lehman.
I 100% agree with you, Councilor Causey. And I too take serious umbrage with the multiple personal attacks that have been levied against staff. To your point though, if the Robert's Rules of Order and our city council rules are enforced, it shouldn't be an issue. And I don't think it requires a separate action to do so. And I think the goal of this motion has already been accomplished, whether it passes or not. So again, I'll be voting no.
Councilor Bisco.
I would only just like to point out that again, civil discourse is protected by law. And while we may not appreciate it, I think there's more than just this one incident that has been experienced by many of us in this last 12 months. So it's fair to say that we've been in scenarios where we have a deep understanding and perhaps an emotional response to some of these things. But I do not think that in a situation where we wish to limit speech, in particular with the word coercion, which has been called out tonight, that would meet the legal standards of slander or defamation or libel. I wonder too if there is not a risk to the city for instituting such a motion.
And the motion was to enter a vote of confidence in support of the city manager. Is that correct?
Correct. But perhaps Council Brewer would be willing to comment on the freedom of speech.
Sure. So the council has the ability to enforce its rules during a meeting. Typically, you can't exclude someone from a meeting unless their behavior is disruptive. Disruptive behavior would include the chair giving the person, here is what the rules are, and the person not following those particular rules. It's less a matter of free speech at that point and more a matter of, okay, can we conduct the business of the council the way that the council has decided that it wants to conduct it? Oregon has very strong protections for freedom of expression, and a person can certainly convey those same thoughts in other ways. But this is one of those things that's been litigated both against state agencies and local governments. And the rulings seem to come out pretty consistently with, if there is disruption of the meeting, yep, you can tell someone they have to be quiet. If they're not going to be quiet, then they need to leave.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Councillor Causey, and then I'm going to say something real quick.
I do agree, however, that's not what this motion is about. So,
Councillor Causey.
I would just reiterate, as I did at the outset, that I would have made the same motion regardless of who the comment had been directed to. And I believe if we take this incident seriously and act on this motion, that we are far more likely to take similar incidents seriously in the future, and to call out those who would make comments like this, regardless of who they're directed at.
Thank you. And I'm just gonna quickly make a motion that we table this indefinitely. And I can speak to that really quick if I get a second. So a motion made by myself and seconded by Councilor Lehman. I just think that we should get this onto an agenda if we're going to do this. I think it's just a better practice. I don't like adding things like this onto the agendas when we already have packed meetings. So that's the emphasis that's the reason for I make this motion, and that's a privileged motion. Yes, if you want to speak to that, Councilor Bisco, that specifically, that would be fine.
I was just hoping that maybe Council Brewer could share a little more insight on these privileged motions, because our council rules don't really give us an opportunity for one person to bring an agenda item to the council. I understand this was through a motion process, but has consumed a pretty hefty chunk of time in what is obviously a very packed agenda evening. So Council Brewer, could you share more on this privileged motion? This is now the second time that this has happened in our council meetings.
Well, no, I think the privileged motion is the motion to table. And one of the reasons why it's considered a privileged motion is that it can be made while the other motion is pending, and that the discussion by the council is really, okay, should there be a date or time certain? That was not the motion, however, it was to have it tabled indefinitely. So it's just they're just slightly different things. In terms of whether it was proper to bring this motion, I didn't hear a point of order at the time. It's too late to do that now.
Thank you, Council Brewer. Could you share more about the mechanism of the privileged motion? I may have not spoken clearly about my ask.
The mechanism of a privileged motion, for example, a motion to table, is during deliberation of a main motion to make a motion to table. And if you get a second, that is the privileged motion.
You can Google Robert's rules and you read all about all the rules about privileged motions.
I think that is in the, if you don't still have the kind of 2-page cheat sheet of Robert's rules, I'll send you another copy.
I appreciate that. I was just looking for an abbreviated clarification on that. I can Google a lot of things,
Yeah.
but here it seemed like a relevant context.
Yeah, really, the clarification on it is there are some motions that are privileged in the sense that you can interrupt another, you can bring the motion while a different motion is on the table. So it's not out of order. It has the privilege to be brought while another motion is there.
So with that, I'd like to vote on the motion to table indefinitely. All in favor of motion tabling this motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And all opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. And any abstentions? Okay, so motion carries 4-2 with 1 abstention. And I'll encourage you to bring that forward and put that on the agenda for the next meeting if you'd like. Okay, so with that, we have a public hearing on the on file PC 21-13, the comprehensive plan update on citizen involvement. And
Mayor, just a point of order, please.
what's that?
So bringing this topic to the agenda, will it fall under the city manager's putting on the agenda, the mayor's putting on the agenda, or the council body needs to vote with a majority to put it on the agenda?
Any single counselor can ask to have something put on the agenda with a week advance notice prior to the council meeting.
And documentation as well, is that correct?
Yes.
So we can anticipate that. Thank you.
So with that, we have a file number PC 21-13 with the applicant being the city of Philomath. And the nature of the application is to update the Philomath Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 1, Citizen Involvement. The applicable criteria is PMC 18.105.060. And tonight's order of proceedings shall be first a staff report, followed by the public testimony with council's question of staff, council deliberations, and a final decision. For anyone wishing to testify, and I don't believe there are any, there will be a limit to 3 minutes for your comments. Persons testifying either orally or in writing may request a continuance or request that the record be kept open. These requests should be included in your testimony. So with that, the public hearing is now open. And Counselor, or I'm sorry, City Recorder, there's no one signed up to speak, is that correct?
That is correct. I do not have anyone signed up.
Okay, and Jim, you had a comment?
Yeah, we may have just missed a step in the script. Conflicts of interest are something that people need to be asked about so that they're on the record if there are any. This is legislative, not quasi-judicial. I can't imagine what a conflict of interest would be in this particular thing, but we just want to have on the record that you were asked. Anybody need to disclose a conflict of interest?
Sure. So on my script, I should open the public hearing and then request for conflicts of interest. So the public hearing is now open. Does any counselor wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest? Seeing none. Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds, meaning that the city council is not the appropriate body for this hearing? Seeing none. Land use decisions such as this case under consideration this evening are evaluated against applicable statewide planning goals and guidelines and criteria from the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan as presented in the staff report. We will now proceed to the staff report. And Chris, do you want to go ahead and offer the staff report?
Your staff report was provided in your council packets, reviewed all the criteria. This has been through the Planning Commission. There's a conclusion on page 3 of 3 and a recommended motion. I'm happy to answer any questions that the city council might have.
Are there any preliminary questions of staff at this time? There will be an opportunity to ask additional questions of staff after the public testimony. Councilor Andrade.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I'm not entirely sure what the two different question periods are. So
Jim, do you want to offer clarification on what the purpose of this particular?
So, this is really those kind of very high level, oh, are we doing this? The idea in a public hearing where you have members of the public who testify is to allow them to give their testimony, which might take care of more detailed questions that you have, maybe the public's testimony, or give you some other questions that you want to ask staff to address those things. I think if there's not anybody from the public signed up, then I don't know that we need to bifurcate that, but that's the normal kind of process.
Right. And do you, Jim, do you need to go through the city attorney statement when there's no one signed up?
Yeah, I do. So that again, it's in the record.
Yeah.
It's, I have one job. It's a silly job, but I'm going to do it.
Okay.
This is the time when we want to remind people who are going to testify that failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the city or other parties the opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. So it's the time and place for people to raise issues who may not be able to later. I don't think we have anybody who's going to raise any issues that haven't already been raised.
Great. Thank you very much. We will now move to public testimony. Before you make any comments, please sign in with your name and address if you're appearing at city council chambers, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. But there are nobody signed up still, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So with that, we can close the public hearing. So the public hearing is now closed. Does any city councilor have any further questions of staff? Councilor Andrade, now would be the appropriate time.
Yeah, looking at the Planning Commission minutes from January 4th, I had a couple questions. Page 1 of 3, lines 42 through 44. I just wanted to say that I appreciated the city manager's suggestion to change citizen to community member. And I was curious as to why, like some context as to why the Planning Commission decided against doing so.
Chris?
Yeah, I think the majority of that conversation centered around distinguishing between people that lived inside city limits as opposed to people who lived outside city limits. It was less about nationality or, anything related to inclusivity. It was more about wanting to differentiate between somebody who lives inside city limits and therefore has a direct impact or direct consequences of decisions that the city makes, as opposed to somebody who lives in the county that we want to hear from, but we don't necessarily want to have in the same level as somebody who lives inside city limits that's affected by, say, water utility bills or city taxes or something like that's specific to Philomath residents. And so, we had the conversation. Planning Commission felt that keeping citizen more clearly defined somebody who lived inside of the city of Philomath city limits.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Follow-up?
And then I guess, was there any discussion about resident? Like changing it to resident as opposed to citizen? I didn't see anything in the minutes, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think I recommended resident, community member. I think we put a couple different options out there and they felt citizen
Okay,
was best.
thank you. And
I'll
should
just-
I wait to?
I'm just going to follow up real quick. I actually, a couple of years ago, I was kind of stuck on this term as well. And, I looked at the definition of citizen, and it was right there that it could be the citizen or the resident of a city. And I was corrected in something that I was wrong on. And it is a applicable thing that people use to discuss or to reference a person who lives within a city limits. So you had a follow-up, Councilor Andrade?
I had additional contextual questions.
Go ahead.
So of the minutes, page 2 of 3. Oh, yeah. 2 of 3, lines 56 through 62. I was hoping for more context for the discussions on adding a paragraph describing recruitment of the Planning Commission members, which I didn't see in the chapter, vision process for the Planning Commission and Committee for Citizen Involvement, and how to keep the Planning Commission and Committee for Citizen Involvement tasks separate from one another. Because those 3 things are all mentioned, but there's no context for me to understand why those things aren't there.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'd have to go back and listen to the meeting to get the context. Councilor Andrade, I don't recall off the top of my head, sorry.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Seeing not Councilor Bisco.
Thank you. So I just have a question about, well, a couple things. So we have a couple acronyms. We have the CIC, we have the CAC, we have CCI, and wanting to make sure that we're very clear that this is a planning commission, excuse me, it's a planning goal. So it's part of Oregon's land use planning goals, citizen involvement on planning decisions. So this is not, I guess I'm going back to Councilor Lehman a couple meetings back or a few meetings back had mentioned a community and a citizen committee that was just on topics of interest for Philomath. I'll just kind of wrap it up that way. And that this is not in fact that this is specific to land use decisions. I think that's correct. More specifically, I'm curious in the second paragraph of chapter 1, citizen involvement, which is after the agenda item summary, I believe. Right. I suspect that this was taken directly from the DLCD, so Oregon State's Oregon Land Use Planning Goals and the DLCD website that talks about goal 1, and I'll just read this brief paragraph because it coincides with this paragraph in this document we're reviewing. Goal 1 calls for, quote, the opportunity for citizens to be involved in all phases of the planning process. It requires each city and county to have a citizen involvement program that addresses, and if you follow in lines 9 through 13 of chapter 1, citizen involvement, that page you will see opportunities for widespread public involvement is what DLCD says and the state says. So it's very closely worded. Effective two-way communication with the public, the ability for the public to be involved in all phases of the planning process, making technical information easy to understand, feedback mechanisms for policymakers to respond to public input. And number 6, which is also part of the state requirement for goal 1, and also on the DLCD website, is not in fact in this document that we have before us. And number 6 is adequate financial support for public involvement efforts. Now, I did see some reference to that in other spaces, but I didn't see it captured here. And I think that's an important part of this conversation as to, do we include a budget for this? Do we compensate members like you're seeing on state agencies and state levels? We're starting to see compensation offsets for people who wouldn't normally be able to provide time, might have burdens to providing time and need babysitters. So there's funding mechanisms that aren't really addressed in any broader context here. And I want to make sure that we don't miss that part of this development of our citizen involvement program. And that's all I have at the moment to that specifically.
Thank you, Counselor Kazi.
And yes, I just wanted to cite policy 4.2 on page 4 of 4. Adequate funding, provide adequate personnel and financial support for the citizen involvement program through the city budget and the land conservation and development department's LCDC maintenance grants as funds are available.
Counselor Bisco. Oh, sorry, Counselor Kazi was, go ahead, you can continue.
No, that's all.
Counselor Bisco.
Yes, and I too saw that, but because this is the opening paragraphs of this proposed document, I was hoping that we might include it in this language as well, so that it more aligns with the state land use definition of goal 1, and it includes that number 6 item, and that can be found on the DLCD website just by searching Oregon citizen involvement or Oregon's land use planning goal number 1.
Counselor Lehman.
If Counselor Bisco was to move that, I would happily second it.
Counselor Bisco, do you have a kind of succinct motion?
Yes, however, give me just a moment to open that page back up to, okay. My motion then is that to align with Oregon's land use planning goal number 1, citizen involvement, that we include in the first paragraph of this document, number 6, adequate financial support for public involvement efforts. I would ask that staff look at how to embed that language into this so it flows not as
Wait, motion's going off the rails.
excuse me. Motion's fine, just needed clarifying then.
So
I'll second.
So we had a motion, and it was seconded. And I'm just going to ask staff, is the motion sufficiently clear?
May I just note that Councilor Bisco, in your motion, you said that paragraph 1, and I
Excuse
thought
me.
you were referring to paragraph 2.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, it would be paragraph 2, and it would be after line 13. There's a partial line there.
Under chapter 1, paragraph 2, line 13, at the end of that paragraph. And so, Councilor Bisco, now do you want to speak to that motion?
Yes, so only that this will bring us into compliance with the recommendations from DLCD, and I think I've already kind of stated that leading into the motion, and thank you for that nudge, Councilor Lehman. My ask is that staff embed that in a paragraph, like with the paragraph, because as DLCD lists it, it is a numerical kind of a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 1 through 5 is already embedded into this paragraph. I suspect that staff can embed that last number 6 of adequate financial support for public involvement efforts into this paragraph.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe.
Oh, I didn't take my hand down.
Okay.
I did now.
Chris, is there any concern? Is there any reason not to include that? Any thoughts?
No, I think it's fine. It's just an oversight on
Okay.
the planning commission's part, so no problem.
Great, thank you. So all in favor, so that was a motion to amend, correct? So we have no other motion on the table at this point, so all in favor of passing the motion to amend, please raise your hand and say aye. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions? Staff or proposed amendments, Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, no, in listening to the planning commission go through this, there was a lot of back and forth about implementing some of these policies and wondering if the city staff could give some kind of a indication on what we might be looking at as a timeline for reviewing some of the policies that revolve around citizen involvement as a council to implement some of these recommendations.
Chris?
Yeah, some of these are things we're already doing. Some of them are reflected in our in the development code already as far as notifications and signage and whatnot. Some of these would be additional items, things that we're not currently doing. Take a little bit deeper dive. That'd probably be something we'd bring back to the council to help prioritize. Obviously, right on the heels of this, we've got housing policies and economic development policies and other things we're working on. So we'll need to prioritize somewhat, but again, there's some low hanging fruit. So I think we definitely improve on some of the things that we're doing. But a lot of this is just a better recognition of things that we're already doing is what I would argue. Our current policy in the comp plan is 2 policies, and it's, engage with the public. They're pretty simplistic. I think this is a more accurate reflection of a lot of things that we're already doing. Obviously some things that we can shoot for.
Thank you. Counselor Bisco.
So I would like to recognize the Planning Commission for their work on this, because this has been an important part of community engagement and conversation for many years. What's nice about this is we're finally bringing the city perhaps a little more in compliance with the requirements of Goal 1. The original, as you would have seen in the document, was first created in and acknowledged in 1976 and came right on the heels of the land use planning goals being implemented in the state of Oregon. I would, however, like to ask that we formally, let me step back a moment. In my quest to identify our citizen involvement committee in past land use processes, it came to light that we don't currently have the original document that was established and with the state, the agreement with the state and the acknowledgement of our 1976 citizen involvement committee and our compliance as such. And in speaking with Council Brewer a while back on this, it would be an option for us to make some formal acknowledgement of this plan as it exists and get it into our record, because currently we don't have access to that. Neither the state nor Philomath is able to put their hands on that original document. So just, I wonder if Council Brewer could speak to what that process would be. I don't know what official motion, not motion, but official action that would be, but making sure that we have firmly embedded the citizen involvement program within the requirements of the state compliance with the land use goals and the city's best interest moving forward, and that we acknowledge this program.
So what we're doing is a post-acknowledgement plan amendment. It would be acknowledged by the state. It's been sent to the state for comment. I don't think they had any. You're passing the ordinance. We'll put it into the city's archive in the form of an ordinance as well. And yes, we would be sending that to DLCD for their permanent record. Their permanent record, it turns out, sometimes gets destroyed by flood or fire. So.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a recommended motion. Anyone wants to push that forward? Councilor Andrade.
I have a question. Councilor Bisco had mentioned having, I don't know if I misunderstood, but having the one phrase added on to the second paragraph. And I thought there was another paragraph that she was asking to embed some information. Is that correct, Councilor Bisco? Like on that topic?
I may have spoke to that paragraph 1 versus paragraph 2. That was not my intent. So does that paragraph 2 where we're adding that last phrase that coincides with number 6 at DLCD? It's that funding.
So it's just the phrase. There wasn't any other intent you had.
I don't think so, no.
Okay, cool. I totally misunderstood that. Thank you.
So we have recommended motion. Councilor Kazi.
I move the city council adopt the findings as presented in the staff report and support adoption of Paloma Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 1, as amended, citizen involvement, planning file number PC 21-13, and direct staff to present the appropriate amendment or amending ordinance to the city council for consideration.
Excellent. So we'll have a,
Point of order, I think it was amended, so maybe the motion needs to be as amended.
she did
instead
mention. she
I did mention that.
So we had a motion made by Councilor Causey and seconded by Councilor Bisco. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. So with that, will staff please prepare formal findings and an ordinance for the council to consider at the next city council meeting, which will be held on what date? Chris or Ruth?
Depends on how far we get tonight.
Okay. But we need to, do we need to put something in there specifically or just say the next council meeting?
Next meeting,
Okay,
at a
great.
future meeting.
At a future meeting. Done. So, great. I think that's it, right, Jim? Okay. Excellent. Good discussion. Thank you for all of that. And are there any visitors or petitions signed up to speak tonight? City Recorder?
I have not received any.
Okay, great. So with that, we have our consent agenda. The following items are considered to be routine and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussions on these items unless a council member so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separate from the consent agenda. Councilor Andrade.
I would like to remove both sets of minutes from the consent agenda.
Okay, so with that, the only thing left is the appointment of the budget officer. So we can get a motion to pass the consent agenda, or actually, you do want to make the suggested changes to the motion so we can still pass the consent agenda?
As in, I make motions
Or
to
do you-
each of those.
Yeah, do you want to discuss the reasons that you wanted to pull the first set of minutes?
As long as I can make a motion to it.
Well, yeah,
Okay, I was confused by what you meant.
you're muted.
Sorry, I was pulling up the email that I sent to the city recorder. So for the January 10th city council meeting minutes, page 3, line 43, I move to add a clause to the end of the sentence and add an additional sentence so that the two sentences read, "There was discussion about the assignments, including Councilors Andrade and Bisco objecting to removal from the Public Works Committee due to the process by which appointments were made. Councilor Andrade further opposed the removal of Councilor Bisco from the Public Works Committee as the only chair to be removed from their appointed committee."
Okay, so we had a motion made to amend the minutes, and that was seconded by so motion made by Councilor Andrade and seconded by Councilor Bisco. Do you want to speak to that, or is that sufficiently clear?
Just that it gives more clarification and contextualizes, there is this implication that there perhaps was it feels like it was misimplied to say that Councilor Bisco and myself didn't want to be removed from the committee just because. There was more to it than that, and it would be let's see, yeah, just more or less that. And pointing out the discriminatory process against both of us, and especially of Counselor Bisco.
Point of
And
order. I think
But-
you're using the term, just point of order. I think using the term discriminatory.
point
has
of order,
implications
I wasn't finished
beyond-
speaking.
Point of order is the, that's funny that you think that that is appropriate. But yes, so the use of the term discriminatory in that context is inappropriate.
Discriminatory process regardless of intent. See, I
And
hadn't
so-
finished. Implicit biases mean that there isn't an intent to do it, but it happened anyway. And that is what happened.
Okay, I understand that that's your perception of what happened. So thank you. Counselor Bisco.
So the reason I support this amendment is I too feel that it did not clarify if we are capturing the intent of the conversation. That intent was not captured. I also support the word discriminatory just as an individual word. And just because your perception, Mayor, does not align with ours, does not mean that yours should subvert our right to speak to that either perception or experience of discriminatory behavior. I think it's a bigger conversation that we're not going to have here, but acknowledging that those perceptions are in fact ours, whether you agree with them or not, is appropriate in this amendment.
It's absolutely appropriate to recognize it as your perception. I agree.
And it's
So-
appropriate for you not to correct my perception, just to be clear and just to get the last word. So the request is that word remains, and do not believe that that's argumentative. It is in fact our interpretation and perception of those actions based on the record.
Absolutely agree. Thank you. So all in favor of passing the motion as made?
Do we have a second?
Yes. All
I'm sorry, I missed.
all in favor of passing the motion, please raise your hand and say aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. So Counselor Nielsen, were you in favor or?
You're
You
muted,
did.
Counselor.
I'm a little fuzzy on how exactly the amendment to be made. Is everything Jessica and everything Counselor Andrade and Counselor Bisco being put into that amendment? Or
There was a motion made by
Sounds
Counselor
fuzzy.
Andrade. There was just a motion made by Counselor Andrade.
could that be repeated?
I'm sorry. So City Recorder, could you repeat the motion?
Okay, so the motion is to add this, add a clause to the end of the sentence and add an additional sentence. So it reads, there was discussion about the assignments, including Councilors Andrade and Bisco objecting to removal from the Public Works Committee due to the process by which appointments were made. Councilor Andrade further opposed the removal of Councilor Bisco from the Public Works Committee as the only chair to be removed from their appointed committee. End of insertion.
Okay. So that is the motion. So all in favor of passing the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. Any abstentions? I can't tell if Counselor Nielsen is frozen. I think she is. Sorry, Counselor Nielsen, we can't understand your words or your video.
I know, I'm sorry, my computer is messing up here. Is it working now?
Not really.
And Counselor
Is
Nielsen,
it better?
can you just state whether you're in support of the motion or against the motion?
Okay, is it working now?
Yes.
I will support the motion.
Okay, so with that, motion carries 4-3. And so you had a second motion, Counselor Andrade?
It was for the next set of minutes. I don't know if Counselor Kazi has any for this set of minutes.
I do.
Counselor Kazi?
On page 1, line 34, Counselor Nielsen is recorded as voting both for and against the motion. I think one of those Nielsens is actually a layman, but I don't know which one. Perhaps Counselor Lehman, you recall.
Yeah, I believe that I was against it, frankly, because I don't think we should have a work session on it.
Does everybody agree that that is what the change should be as a correction? City recorder?
If you're not comfortable with it, the easiest thing to do is to table these minutes and me to go back and double check that and correct it and bring it back to a subsequent meeting.
Counselor Lehman, are you okay with saying that you were against it? Is that what you said? Or do you want us to go back and
No,
check?
I'm good with that.
Okay. That seems like a reasonable thing. Everybody head nod if you're okay with that. Okay. Counselor Bisco?
I'd like to make sure that Councilor Andrade's changes do in fact get made here, and I suspect that they will, but is it appropriate, since that motion and vote was taken here, that we adopt that amendment and then bring these minutes back for review on this other topic at the next meeting?
Jim?
Yeah, I think you have adopted that amendment by the vote. So what will come back to you should be that set of minutes with that amendment and whatever correction the city recorder finds on the audio, I think, or video.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Brewer.
And Counselor Andrade, you had changed to the next minutes?
So I just need to clarify, did Counselor Lehman say he voted no, and that is the way you want the minutes to reflect? In
Correct.
which case you can move to approve the minutes as amended with those two corrections, or not corrections, the correction and the motion that's been approved.
Sure. I thought we just addressed the next set of minutes that we can just pass the consent agenda as amended. Counselor Andrade?
Okay. So for the next set of minutes on January 24th, page 11, line 30, I move to add a clause to the end of the sentence so that the sentence reads, "There were comments about addressing sidewalk installation citywide, including prior discussions at the Public Works Committee level, where the committee had concluded that this topic is moot due to issues of jurisdiction and domain regarding sidewalk maintenance." And the reason for this motion is because
Wait.
Oh.
So we have a motion made by Counselor Andrade and a seconded by Counselor Bisco. Counselor Andrade, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I believe it is important for future staff and elected officials to know this information, especially this has happened before. You know, we had an entire meeting devoted to this and it ended up being pointless. And so I don't want that to happen again to another Public Works Committee. And so it's just important that it's in this space where we are talking about who is responsible to pay for sidewalks also, and to what amount.
Thank you, Counselor Bisco.
So I support this amendment also. As the former chair of the Public Works Committee, we not only spent an entire meeting to this topic, there was extensive review on both ends of this conversation. At least for myself on committee, I know that we also worked with it in the meeting prior to some extent. The fact of the matter is at the end of the day, we spent a fair amount of time reviewing something that, as Councilor Andrade pointed out, was declared moot by the city manager. This is topics that have been brought before former councilors and or committees And there was no conclusive way to move forward with a decision. There was, I believe, a reference or a recommendation even to bring this to the city council to clarify that, because of the disparity between certain property owners are allowed to go without sidewalk improvements, and yet others are being required to implement those sidewalk improvements. So it is an important part of the record, and I would like to see it stand in this space.
Thank you. So all in favor of making that amendment, please raise your hand and say aye.
May I ask Councillor Andrade to repeat the amendment, please?
So many windows to open. So I move to add a clause to the end of the sentence. So for page 11 of the minutes, line 30, in case you're missed that. So that the sentence reads, there were comments about addressing sidewalk installation citywide, including prior discussions at the Public Works Committee level, where the committee had concluded that this topic is moot due to issues of jurisdiction and domain regarding sidewalk maintenance.
And Frank, I'm just going to add that, if I read that, it doesn't offer enough context for me to actually know what you're talking about. And personally, I just feel that we don't need all the details in here, especially when they're not sufficiently detailed. But Councilor Andrade.
I think it's important to have at least a description of the issue, because then that can take someone back to the Public Works Committee minutes, if need be, to find more information. And like I said, I think it's important to stay here because it's just very important to this conversation with who's going to be paying for sidewalks and to what extent.
Okay, thank you. And Councilor Bisco?
And I too will extend that support. I do think it's very important. We are talking about, so sidewalks is a very contentious issue. We know that because the sidewalk conversation outside of property owners on North 11th Street was discussed amongst the community. We heard that from council anecdotal reports. The fact is that the decision was made by that committee, and staff actually said it in a more pointed way than the word moot. I think that's a more polite way of saying that, but because sidewalks are such an important part of moving forward, local improvement districts potentially, whether or not that's how we ask community members to develop or improve their streets, it seems that it is a relevant decision and conclusion on that review process. And to her point to Councillor Andrade's point of the context, because we do have those cross-jurisdictional spaces where we have county-owned property and city-owned property that are unimproved sidewalk areas that fall in one way under city, but in other ways not. I'm not quite sure that we fully understood or vetted that. There is a whole list of shouldn't be improved, doesn't make sense to improve, need to be improved, and all of it just got tabled. So it seems a relevant context. It's not a big ask to add that phrase to these minutes, and then it just is there. So any future public works discussions will be able to go back to that benchmark.
Any further discussion? Chris?
Yeah, just a mental note for the council. When we get to agenda item H2 later this evening, we'll just remember this moment, I think, when we're talking about minutes and action minutes and how much time we spend as staff trying to write what's happened in the minutes and get that captured in the minutes, and then how much time we spend second guessing ourselves and triple guessing ourselves and trying to get it right. It's really, I'll just be frank, it's very frustrating from a staff standpoint to try to take minutes for a body that insists on having their intentions and their thoughts and everything captured in the minutes. It's really an impossible task. So again, that'll come up later. I just want to make a point at this juncture to just make a mental note, because when we get to H2, hopefully some of the things that staff's presenting will help save a considerable amount of time, both on the staff side and on the council side when we get to minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bisco?
So I appreciate that mental note or mental comment, but I will say that being on the receiving end of having to read pages and pages of minutes to make sure that actions are in fact captured. And there are multiple instances of misrepresentations on the Public Works Committee with those minutes. I too have issues with asking unpaid individuals to have to peruse minutes to the extent of 2 to 3 to 4 hours because you have to go back and listen to video and audio recordings to ensure that things like the city manager declining to present a report that he's asked to are in fact captured in the minutes when other very argumentative comments.
Point of order.
May I finish, please?
Sorry,
other-
point of
Point of
order.
order.
Yeah, so Counselor
So
Causey.
I'm actually
I'm sorry,
referring to
Counselor
minutes that
Biscoe.
exist.
Counselor Biscoe, you're out of order. Allow Counselor Causey to speak to why she believes you're out of order. Thank you.
Whether or not the city manager did or didn't present a report is not germane to this discussion.
And I will say, Counselor Causey, that it is because in those particular minutes, there were 4 instances where you were greatly embellished your argument with
Okay.
my position.
Counselor Biscoe,
It's in the
I'm-
record,
I'm
Mayor,
calling you out of order for now, so we're gonna
and
move
you
on.
often do because
And
you
I'm gonna
don't
do
want
it
to
again.
hear.
Okay,
It's
we're
in
gonna
the
take a
record.
break, 5 minutes.